Hey everyone, and welcome to This Explainer. Today, we are tackling a massive paradox right at the heart of our global energy transition. We usually think of climate change as just a tech problem, like we just need to build better solar panels, right? But today, we're going to look at the global power sector for what it actually is. It's this giant, incredibly complex socio-technical system that needs a total structural overhaul. And honestly, how we handle this overhaul is ultimately going to determine the cost of your electricity bill and the future of our entire climate. Okay, let's dive into this because we really have a profound contradiction on our hands here. Think about it. If zero-emission tech like solar and wind are technically ready to go and, historically speaking, literally cheaper than ever, why in the world are global CO2 emissions from electricity generation still climbing continuously? It doesn't make sense. Well, the answer isn't just about the physical technology anymore. It's actually about the invisible architecture of our global institutions. They are kind of failing to steer the ship properly.
Let's start with Section 1, the Power Sector Challenge.
Moving right into Section 2, 7 transformation hurdles. So, to actually hit those Paris Agreement goals, we basically need a complete top-to-bottom power sector transformation. And with the plummeting costs for renewables, it sounds like an easy win on paper, right? But the physical reality of our power grid paints a way more complicated picture. Now, before we rush to judge the global institutions in charge of managing all this, we really need to grasp the sheer weight of what they're dealing with. There are 7 huge physical and economic obstacles standing in the way of a fully clean grid. Let's just breeze through these quickly. First, we've got to integrate all this intermittent renewable tech by heavily upgrading our storage. Second, we literally have to rebuild our physical grid infrastructure to connect completely new power sources. Third, the money. This is monumental. We need to actively shift an estimated $20 trillion in investments away from fossil infrastructure and into renewables by 2050. $20 trillion. Fourth is the fear of international industrial competition, where countries are terrified of losing businesses to nations with cheaper, dirtier power. Add to that human capacity bottlenecks, meaning we desperately need a skilled workforce right now. And let's not forget the profound moral imperative here. 1.1 billion people globally still don't even have access to electricity. We have to fix that. Finally, number 7, we have to manage the intense social barriers and the localized economic shocks this whole transition is going to cause. Phew, that's a lot. Let's look at Section 3, the global governance landscape. So, with that massive set of hurdles in front of us, who exactly is in charge of coordinating all of this? Who sets the rules, facilitates the cash, and acts as the referee for this global transition? Well, it looks a lot like this. And this brilliantly illustrates the global climate change regime complex for the power sector. Notice how it is absolutely not a single unified governing body. Instead, it's this really messy, overlapping web of over 30 different intergovernmental and transnational institutions. We've got overarching bodies like the UNFCCC, energy-specific organizations like the IEA and IRENA, and major financial heavy hitters like the World Bank. On to Section 4, grading the global response. With such a complex web of actors out there, you have to ask, how are they actually doing? To figure that out, we're going to look at what's basically an annual performance review, grading these global institutions against 5 core functions that are absolutely required to solve our energy crisis. And looking at these grades, wow, the results are wildly uneven across the board. Our global institutions get really high marks when it comes to transparency and accountability, and that's thanks to some incredibly detailed data coming out of the IEA and IRENA. They are also doing quite well in knowledge and learning. But look down at the bottom row. The lowest grade goes to rules and standards. We have a severe deficit when it comes to establishing binding, coordinated rules that address things like global industrial competition. There is practically zero international authority out there coordinating actual target setting. Let's zoom in a little closer on that means of implementation grade for a second. While the capacity building and the financial means out there are vast, they are heavily contested. Multilateral development banks are funneling massive amounts of money into developing sustainable grids, which is fantastic news. But here is the catch. Many of these exact same institutions have been accused of simultaneously impeding progress because they continue to finance massive, long-lasting fossil fuel infrastructure right alongside the clean stuff. Which brings us to Section 5, the fossil fuel blind spot. And honestly, that contradiction leads us directly to the most shocking and glaring failure uncovered in our performance review. This side-by-side comparison reveals a dramatic discrepancy. See, our global institutions are absolutely fantastic at cheering on the deployment of renewable energy. The signal to go out and build more wind and solar is super loud and clear, but when it comes to the other side of the equation, total crickets. These institutions have produced an incredibly weak signal when it comes to explicitly mandating the proactive phase-out of coal, oil, and natural gas. Now, to be fair, there are pockets of progress, certainly. For instance, the World Bank actually committed to stop financing upstream oil and gas back in 2017. However, the global pipeline for new coal power plants around the world remains incredibly extensive. Without a coordinated global rulebook that actively orchestrates the deliberate decline of fossil fuels, this massive blind spot threatens to lock in decades of planetary warming, completely bypassing the 2-degree limit set by the Paris Agreement. And we really need to remember here, missing that target isn't just some abstract policy failure. It guarantees extreme climate impacts that are going to directly affect your future and your everyday life.
Finally, Section 6. Upgrading global institutions. So, knowing all of this, how do we actually fix this broken system? Which organizations need to step up? And what exactly do they need to change about themselves to get us on track? Well, the crucial point is that we already have institutions positioned to take the lead. The International Energy Agency, or IEA, is the closest thing we have to a full-blown World Energy Organization. They've got the analytical capacity and the convening power to orchestrate a global phase-out. But there's a huge historical catch. You see, the IEA was originally founded as a fossil fuel buyers club to counter OPEC and secure oil supplies for developed nations. To lead the charge today, the IEA requires a massive, fundamental identity shift. And that historical baggage creates very real limitations for them today. Because of its origins, the IEA is structurally tethered to the OECD, which is an organization mostly representing wealthy, developed nations. To give you an idea of how this limits their global authority, a former IEA deputy director famously and pretty hilariously described being an autonomous agency under the OECD by saying, "It's like being 35 years old and still living with your parents." As long as they are viewed as a club for the global north, it is incredibly difficult for the IEA to adopt a truly global mandate that developing nations will actually trust and follow. Alongside the IEE, the UNFCCC, the body responsible for the Paris Agreement, they have to shift their paradigm too. They can no longer just focus on abstract emission targets. They must explicitly endorse a clear, sector-specific decarbonization roadmap to actively manage the decline of the fossil fuel era. This means looking ahead and anticipating the massive social and economic shocks that are definitely going to happen when we begin closing down existing fossil fuel infrastructure, ensuring a transition that doesn't just leave vulnerable communities behind. Ultimately, this explainer highlights a profound paradox sitting right at the heart of global climate governance. We literally have the technology, and we fully understand the economics. But as we look at the legacy architecture of our global institutions, we are left with one vital, incredibly provocative question. Can institutions that were originally built to protect and expand the fossil fuel era truly be trusted to orchestrate its end? Think about that for a second. Thank you so much for watching, and keep questioning the systems that shape our world.